Hi, everybody. This talk is called The Best Way to Complain is to Make Things, and it is very much intended as a provocation for discussion. The title is actually a favorite quote and mantra that I try to live by from James Murphy of LCD Sound System, and in a few minutes you're going to understand what I mean by this. I want to thank Sinead and Cyril and the AI for Designers folks for inviting me to present. I rarely give local talks, so this is super fun for me. My name is Burton Rast. I'm a design partner at Strange Ventures here in San Francisco. You can find me all over the web via the handle that you see here, Mr. Burton spelled out. And before we get into all the AI stuff, so that you know who you're talking to, here is a quick story about how I arrived in precisely this seat. So growing up, I was an endlessly artistic kid, always sketching and illustrating, designing and doodling, typically alongside my brother David, that's him on the right, and that super cute kid on the left is me. Now, unfortunately, at least for my family, that cute kid grew up to be a delinquent punk rocker. Now, while my friends and I were not particularly good students academically, we were certainly students of the aesthetic of the punk and the hardcore scene. And given my lifelong interest in art, I was immediately drawn to the graphic design of punk. Super striking logos for bands like Black Flag, Crass, and San Francisco's very own Dead Kennedys. These meant more to me than any mainstream corporate branding, because it was all DIY design, just like my art. So as an artist, I realized I had to learn how to also become a designer. So first, I learned how to use this program called Hotline, which is how a lot of folks used to pirate software way back in the 90s. Next step, obviously, download Photoshop. For those of you who aren't old enough, Photoshop is kind of all there was for like a very long time. But like any tool, I needed the right project and motivation to learn how to use it. So naturally, I made fake IDs. So this is an actual fake ID that I made for my dear friend Justin. Justin is still a brother to me to this day, so I've afforded him a little anonymity via pixelation, but this is legit how I learned to use Photoshop. So as I moved on from the illegal arts into more traditional graphic design, if I'm being honest, graphic design got real boring for me real fast. Now, don't get me wrong, I absolutely love the craft of graphic design. It just wasn't challenging me in the ways that really move me. But then an old high school friend named Jay Hill, he turned my world completely upside down. Jay attended art school where he was learning how to create these new interactive web-based animations, something I had never before seen. Through my friend, I quickly learned that just like the DIY art and design that drew me to punk, the early web was do-it-yourself and punk as fuck. I was obsessed. At the time, I was working the front desk at this busted old hotel just north of Chicago. I installed pirated copies of all the software that I wanted to learn on the hotel's computers just so I could keep working my new craft in every spare moment that I had between checking in guests. I made motion graphic animations and websites for friends who were artists, photographers, musicians, rave promoters, anyone in my world who was doing anything interesting. And this is when I began to sort of get noticed by the industry and ultimately hired. Over the following decade, I hustled my way first through the startup, then client-side and ad agency worlds, before finally landing a role at IDEO, beginning a journey that would ultimately move me from my home city of Chicago to their headquarters here in San Francisco. After 7 years at IDEO, I joined Google, where I worked as a UX lead on their security and privacy team. And this was a role that really got me intimately acquainted with the tension between the needs of users, regulators, and of course the business needs of these multi-trillion-dollar publicly traded tech companies, which, I'm not going to lie to you, is truly exhausting work. So after 5.5 years with Google, I left to take some time off, to travel the world, to give a ton of talks, and to build a bunch of stuff, sort of hit the hard reset button on my career while I considered what it was that I wanted to do next. And my next move came late last year when I was invited to join Strange Ventures as a design partner. So Strange is a fund that partners with early stage creative AI startups, many of them here in the Bay. And my dear friend and founder, Tara Tan, is the one who introduced me to the crew here at AI for Designers. So that's a roughly 25-year bio in 5 minutes. There's a 45-minute version of this story that I usually tell in my talks, but that's kind of another story for another time. All right. So let's get into it. We are here to talk about what I call accelerating the enshittification off the backs of creators. And for anyone who's unfamiliar with this term, enshittification, it was actually coined by a writer named Cory Doctorow in November of 2022. Enshittification is a pattern where online services and products experience a decline in quality over time. And I'm sure we've all experienced this, right? Whether it's Airbnb, Amazon, Facebook, Google, whatever the platforms we've used, certainly we've seen them degrade over time. So I'm sure I don't have to tell folks at an AI event here in San Francisco that there's sort of endless speculation about how this is all going to play out with the advent of AI content in the coming years. And with this in mind, I'm going to offer a provocation. Discussing the innumerable what-if scenarios regarding AI is exhausting. And industry fatigue has long since set in. I'm sure we've heard people or seen people complaining about this on social media or in blog posts, leading to headlines like this one, my very favorite: "I will fucking pile drive you if you mention AI again." So as the old saying goes, a prototype is worth 1,000 meetings. So my provocation, let's prototype some prospective futures to shine a light on possible downsides and inspire proactive mitigation efforts. So I'm going to walk you through a trio of prototypes that I've made in service of this effort. The first is called HCD GPT, aka Human Centered Design GPT, a project that I began way back in 2017. So the mission of my project was pretty straightforward. Let's see if we can automate an entire consultancy. And my design brief in challenge and deliverable format. First, the challenge. How might we leverage contemporary AI technologies to automate the collective expertise and brand voice of my former employer, IDEO? The deliverables: a custom version of ChatGPT that combines the instructions, methodologies, and skills expressed in IDEO's public-facing websites, toolkits, and blog posts. Now, I realized we were not talking about things like GPTs or transformers or any of that way back in 2017, so a little bit of context, specifically the story of Margaret Atwood. So this is Margaret Atwood. She's the author of Handmaid's Tale and a number of other books. In 2017, back when I still worked at IDEO, a team there approached me and asked if I could build an AI-powered bot that speaks in the voice of her style of writing. Of course, I agreed because I had no idea how to do that, and that's the best way I know how to learn new stuff, is commit to something you don't know how to do. So because this was an internal proof of concept, it wasn't a public-facing thing, I was able to take a few more liberties than I would if it was sort of a production class build. So I first downloaded a BitTorrent file of all of Margaret Atwood's books for use as my training data. I then downloaded an open source neural net to train on the author's works. And this is what training looked like back in 2017, right? Long before the inviting UI of all of today's chatbots, we only had the command line to watch as we sort of hoped things were working in the way that we intended. And it did work. And our Twitter bot was born. You can see her bio here. I'm an artificially intelligent Margaret Atwood facsimile trained by a multi-layer recurrent neural net. Holler. Sadly, Twitter was not yet ready for AI bots, so our account got locked, but I totally didn't care. My experiment had worked, and I knew exactly what I wanted to do with my new superpower, and that is make an IDEO bot, right? Like, IDEO is the perfect candidate for my project, as they've got a ton of public-facing published materials and like a really unified brand voice. So I first approached my friend and IDEO's then CCO, Paul Bennett. I explained to Paul what I had created and asked if he might assist with my IDEO bot experiment by compiling every book and blog post and TED Talk and all of the stuff that he's written. Paul was way into it, right? He's the CCO, like I said, so coming from the creative side, he saw all of that promise and opportunity. So I was super excited. I then approached Tim Brown, IDEO's then CEO and current chair, and Tim was, on the other hand, quite a lot more trepidatious. And as the CEO, kind of understandably so, right? So even way back then, 7 years ago, I was already getting a taste of this tension between the promise and sort of creative possibility that AI enables versus the needs of the business and, of course, to protect the brand. So let's fast forward 6 years. In the fall of last year, OpenAI released custom GPTs, that is, the ability to augment ChatGPT with custom knowledge and instructions, and immediately my project was reborn. So first, I needed custom public-facing, non-confidential data to inform my GPT. In other words, I needed to do what every AI company does today, scrape the web, which I learned is actually remarkably easy. So this is the program that I wrote to do it. For what it's worth, this is not a I know how to code flex, but rather me showing you how easy it is. I had never before written a Python program. I know a bunch of other languages, I just never before used Python. And I didn't use ChatGPT to help me code it. I wanted to know how easy or how difficult it might be. So if you look at it, minus the comments and the white space, there's maybe 30 lines of actual code here. That's it. It took me no time at all to write this. So when you run my program, the only interaction it requires is that you enter a sitemap URL. This is the sitemap for IDEO.com. A sitemap, it's just a list of all of the pages of a website in pretty simple to read XML format. It's meant to help search engines find, crawl, and index all of a website's content. But inadvertently, it also makes scraping the website remarkably easy. So as you can see, this is when you run my program, this is what the command line looks like. And the red arrow is pointing to where I enter the URL for IDEO sitemap file. That's literally all you have to do to run this program. And then the program uses natural language processing to parse each web page and download its contents into one giant text file. I then upload that text file into OpenAI's GPT Builder tool, add an icon, a description, custom instructions, and conversation starters. And 7 years after I first set out to create it, HCD GPT was born. So I was immediately curious to know, what could my new custom GPT do that normal ChatGPT can't do? And this is the first one. I built a ton of GPT since then, but this is the first one that I built. This is live on the ChatGPT store, by the way, so anyone can use this for free. But yeah, how to test it, right? How do I figure out what does it know that normal ChatGPT doesn't? But then, of course, it hit me. It's so obvious, right? Natural language, duh, right? So I simply asked it a question. What can HCD GPT do, thanks to the custom knowledge I uploaded, that ChatGPT did not previously know how to do? Describe the new expertise and abilities enabled by this knowledge. And here's the reply that it gave me. Quote, thanks to the custom knowledge I've absorbed from the document you uploaded, my expertise now spans a broad range of design thinking, innovation, and creative problem-solving techniques applied across various industries and challenges. So I know the text is pretty small, but if you can see it here, this knowledge includes healthcare, education, environmental sustainability, and social impact, all arenas within which IDEO has deep expertise that they've been working in years. So now to really test it, I gave HCD GPT an actual brief for a Google project that I led. To be clear, nothing confidential or proprietary. I'm not trying to get sued by $1 trillion company, right? But rather just a high-level description of the challenge that I faced. And I asked it to plan a huge sort of week-long sprint and workshop that I had actually run in real life back in 2019 to kick off this project. Of course, I am not going to share the output. Really, it's just a detailed workshop and sprint plan. But I will say that I was absolutely blown away by the quality of what it produced. It was yo, I would not change a word, right? It's a really fantastic sprint plan. So much so, it inspired me to write an accompanying essay titled Automating IDEO to Do My Job at Google. Now, perhaps you'll not be surprised that it was suggested that I not publish this essay, and I won't, and I haven't, and I didn't. But I will instead remind you, in the absence of any real AI legislation or regulation, all of this is totally legal. Right. Next prototype, AI in real life. So shortly after my friend Tara here invited me to join the team at Strange, we sat down for our first working session. Now, Tara and I are both hardcore designers and makers at heart, so our immediate desire was to create something together. And what we landed on was, let's create a parody of a popular game that came out of my home city that you might be familiar with called Cards Against Humanity. But let's do a parody with a topical thematic twist, specifically the theme of robots and AI taking over the world. And with that, our card game AI Against Humanity was born. Our only design principle was to lean into generative AI wherever possible and at every turn. We used it to create our branding, artwork, and packaging, to write the hundreds of individual playing cards, We had it write our entire website, as well as the marketing copy, code the thing, everything. We're live at againsthumanity.ai. You can actually buy our game. And believe it or not, we're also in talks with a big box retailer who has expressed interest in putting our product on their shelves. So this is really my first enshittification project that may litter not only the internet, but also has the potential to do so in the real world in stores across the country. Last prototype, the Twang Tanglers, aka enshittification streaming edition. So recently, and to the surprise of no one, the AI music generators have arrived on the scene. Chief among them is this one, Suno, which has received quite a lot of funding and press this year. If I'm being honest, at first, I wasn't all that interested to kick the tires and test these out. I don't really have the need for a whole lot of custom music in my projects. But then I read this piece in the New York Times Magazine called "Why Did This Guy Put a Song About Me on Spotify?" The author profiled a man who has manually created more than 25,000 songs on Spotify, off of which he makes literally hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. One of the tracks is actually a song about the author. This guy writes songs about literally anyone and everyone, no matter whether it's a big, a superstar public figure or just sort of some random author, which is how the author found this man. He searched for his own name on Spotify and then sort of went down the rabbit hole and saw that this guy has tens of thousands of songs. So, all right, interesting story. You definitely have my attention. So reading on, I learned something that very much piqued my interest. Specifically, you can't trademark song titles. So this got me immediately thinking. If you can't trademark song titles, then you can really easily game a search algorithm. So now I had a project. I asked ChatGPT, make me 12 song titles, each of which are mashups of 2 existing popular songs. You see some of the output here. Stairway to Heaven is a Place on Earth, Smells Like Teen Spirit in the Sky, Under the Bridge Over Troubled Water. You get the idea. So, of course, I also used it to derive both a band name and an album name. I chose the most random genre that I could think of, specifically throwback Appalachian folk music, and pasted these song titles into Suno with brief thematic descriptions like upbeat, Appalachian folk, lo-fi, that kind of thing. I then used a platform called DistroKid, which automates publishing across all major music platforms: Spotify, Apple, Amazon, YouTube, Tidal, all of them. And when I say automates, I mean you don't even need to make individual accounts on each of the platforms. You simply upload your album or your songs, and you hit publish. And with that, my throwback, lo-fi, algorithmic Appalachian folk band, the Twang Tanglers, was born.
Midnight falls and the fireflies gleam under the southern moon. I hear the sweet dream. California girl with eyes so blue whispers in my ear.
So our debut album, Folklore from the Fringe, dropped on April Fool's Day of this year. As you can see, we're live on Spotify, YouTube and YouTube Music, Apple Music and iTunes Store, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, and you can even soundtrack your TikToks and Reels with the sweet, sweet sounds of our algorithmic Appalachian folk music. There are absolutely 0 AI labels of any kind on any one of the platforms, and I'm monetized across all of them. I also own the copyright as both the lyricist and composer, which you are granted only when you join the paid tier of Suno. If you don't pay for Suno, you don't own the copyright, which is not shady at all. So remember what I said about accelerating the enshittification? This is what that looks like. The whole thing took me about 2 hours, but only because I did it manually. If you wanted to create and publish fake music at scale, of course, there's an unofficial Suno API. Now, with all that said, you know who else is thinking at scale? The Recording Industry Association of America, who is now suing Suno and other music generators for $150,000 per infringing song. The case is going to meander through the courts over the next year or two before any precedent is set, so by all means enjoy it while you can, because if you've read the details of the RIAA complaint, they're pretty damning. They even got Suno-generated songs to repeat the names of actual artists, proving that copyrighted works were used without permission to train their models. Here is a very small taste of their legal filing. Quote, the artist Jason Derulo is known for singing his own name at the beginning of his sound recordings. Suno has also replicated this tag. For example, Jason Derulo's name is repeated at the beginning of the Suno-generated digital music track, a file aptly titled Jason Derulo, in a manner exceedingly similar to how Jason Derulo tags his own recordings. So yeah, that's going to be pretty difficult to explain away to a judge. Best of luck, Suno folks. So all of this brings us to policy. As I mentioned earlier, I spent half a decade working on the security and privacy team at Google. Through this experience, I became really intimately familiar with how tech companies manage the tension between the needs of the company while satisfying the legal requirements to put in place to keep users safe. It's not particularly controversial to assert that corporations are, first and foremost, in the business of making as much profit as possible, which is to say business needs and not user needs always come first. To protect users from the profit-driven whims of mega corporations, you really have only 3 avenues within which you can affect change: legislation, regulation, and litigation. Now, in the EU, you can pursue each one of these avenues as they have strong protections in place for user privacy, and they've already passed the first version of their AI Act. In the States, we have none of this. Here, we get unchecked tracking by countless companies of every American through their phone's location and browsing data, no meaningful privacy protections, and absolutely no movement on regulatory policy for AI of any kind. Why? Well, because government's in the pocket of big business through unchecked super PAC donations and lobbying efforts. And tech companies now lobby Congress in numbers comparable only to military defense contractors, which is precisely as crazy as it is totally unsurprising. So you can forget about the first 2 avenues in the US, which leaves us only with litigation. Obviously, this is less than ideal, but it's not a dead end. For instance, if you're a hugely profitable corporation like the New York Times, you can afford to take other giant companies to court, as they have with Microsoft and OpenAI. But individuals also have power to band together and effect litigation via class action lawsuits, as is the case with the $5 billion lawsuit against Google for tracking people in incognito. Google recently settled this lawsuit, and it's one that's actually very near and dear to my heart because I led UX for Google-wide incognito. And I traveled the world working with the biggest teams at Google in an effort to make the infrastructure changes necessary to fix this and meet the privacy expectations of our users. And I failed. We all failed. That is, until a group of Californian citizens brought this lawsuit and won. So before we wrap up, let's make it personal for a moment. I have to imagine it's pretty obvious that I love to make stuff, especially so with emerging technologies. This has long been a core component of my identity as a designer. So of course, I do very much enjoy leveraging these new to the world sort of AI technologies to create new to the world experiences. That said, I also very much understand why artists and authors and publishers and musicians and songwriters are so upset about their work being copied and used as training data without permission or compensation. There's actually a site called haveibeentrained.com where artists can check to see if their work has been used to train AI image generators. And believe it or not, I'm in it. Design is a super fun day job and all, but I also have a considerable passion for photography. And as you can see, I make photographs in a particular style. And my images have been published over the years by a number of outlets, including Design Boom, Cult of Mac, NBC, CNN, and even Apple, among others. So even though I have mitigations in place on my own websites to protect against scrapers, this is all you need to add. It's just a text file. It's that easy. These much bigger platforms that have published my work, they don't have those protections in place, which I can do nothing about. So even if I use the opt-out feature on the Have I Been Trained site today, it's already too late. The image generator models are already trained, and whether I like it or not, my work is in there. So I don't want to end on some rhetorical device like, oh, how do we fix this, or where do we go from here? I would rather describe how I believe that we've got here, which is a lesson in etymology. The rise of Web 2.0 in the 2000s was marked by the arrival of user-generated content. That is, image, videos, text, and other media that users self-publish to content aggregation platforms and social media. But Like so many phrases that don't quite so easily roll off the tongue, over time, we shortened it. We started referring to all published creative human expression as content. And in doing so, we inadvertently commodified human expression via this new language that we use to describe it. And language matters. Because if it's content, if that's how we think about it, then it was merely scraped, right? It's just feed for the machine. No big deal, right? Whereas if it's art, then it was plagiarized. And plagiarism is defined as the practice of taking someone else's work or ideas and passing them off as one's own. In other words, theft. I think about this idea and the importance of language quite a lot, not only because my own personal works have been used to train these models, but also because I'm curious to see how the use of this language affects incoming generations. Most young Americans are today growing up with a desire to be social media influencers, or as we also call them, content creators. Not artists, not authors, not athletes or actors, influencers. People with the ability to influence potential buyers of a product or service by promoting or recommending the items on social media. Which is to say, people working in service only of business needs, not human needs, and certainly not in service of their own human creative expression. So this is the world that we've designed. And when I think about my two beautiful godsons, I have to wonder, will they grow up creating immediately forgettable content to feed to the machine? Or will they instead be celebrated as they grow to express themselves artistically via any discipline that piques their interest or stirs their passions? And of course the answer is, right now, it's impossible to know. But what I do know is that I want their expressions, all of our creative expressions, to be recognized and valued as uniquely, authentically human. And I know also that it's our responsibility, all of us in this room and certainly in this industry, to design a future where this is the world that they grow up in. With that, I say thank you. So the monetization, the money comes through DistroKid, the platform that automates the publishing across the platforms, and you don't get immediately paid. It's like every 6 months or something. I mean, the whole point was, like, if you search on Spotify or YouTube or whatever, Smells Like Teen Spirit, obviously the Nirvana track is going to come up first, but Smells Like Teen Spirit in the Sky by the Twang Tanglers is also going to show up in those search results. So I imagine I'm getting clicks via just like morbid curiosity, like what in the hell is this thing? Yeah. You can now upload original audio to Suno to inform the output, not only with your sort of text-based description, but also an audio file. But at the time you couldn't, and I didn't. I don't have to. That lives on chatgpt.com. Like, so I have no control over the security. When you use OpenAI's GPT Builder, you're not only building on top of ChatGPT, but it lives on their platform and in their GPT store. So if anyone's doing any sort of like code injection or any of that, that's their deal. I can't even imagine how many people are trying to break ChatGPT all day, every day. But what I created lives on their site, not mine. So any security issues would be theirs to deal with, not mine.